Hi everyone, this is Katrina Van Oosten in my informative speech. Jim Rohn once said, effective communication is 20% what you know and 80% about how you feel about what you know. Today I'll be discussing the ways in which verbal and nonverbal communication coincide with one another. Through the use of repetition, inflection, complementary cues, substitution, and contradiction, I'll demonstrate about how what we say verbally and what we communicate nonverbally gives way to communicate our feelings and emotions to one another. So we reviewed the 5 viewpoints of communication. So first let's talk about repetition. Webster's defines repetition as the act of doing or something, saying something again, simply the act of repeating oneself. In the introduction of today's thesis, I used hand gestures to identify the 5 items I was going to be covering. This is just a simple example of repetition using nonverbal cues. Another example is the way I choose to show leadership to my daughter. I might nod yes in agreement and smile when she's doing something great, and no and frown in disagreement when she's doing something that she shouldn't. So repetition coupled with inflection, or the rise and fall of our voice, is another way that we can communicate nonverbally. We've learned about repetition and how we can cue those nonverbal communication styles with verbal. So let's look a little bit about how inflection works. An example might be a teacher in a classroom. She might ask her class, please be quiet, to which she gets no regard to the class and they continue their conversations and they're not paying attention. To the contrary, she might say, class, please be quiet. This use of inflection, or the commanding way in which she's changed the tone of her voice, illustrates that she's the leader and it's time to pay attention. The Bates website for organizational leadership takes this to the next level. They simply state, to be a leader, if you want to come across as intelligent, interested, and energized about what you're saying, that it's not just about getting the words right, but it's about the inflection that really give your talk meaning. So inflection affects the rise and fall of our voice. Now let's look at the way in which complementary cues affect what we say. Hugo's example says, a compliment is like a kiss through a veil. Victor Hugo quite simply was stating, let's say there's a wedding and the groom and the bride are about to do the wedding kiss. The groom smiles at her, he lifts her veil, he whispers, I love you, and then they have the kiss. The whispering of the I love you really complements what he's doing, which is illustrating to everyone there and his beloved that he is in love with her. A common and favorite complimentary of mine is watching a comedian. He knows or she knows that they're doing a great job by the laughter from the audience and the nonverbal cues that they're giving by smiling and enjoying the show. Through the use of complementary nonverbal cues like smiling and laughing, we can communicate what we're saying verbally. So now let's talk about substitution. Webster says substitution is just replacing something or someone with something or someone else. One example might be hello or goodbye. I can simply wave, and you're going to know that that means hello or goodbye. I can substitute the hello or goodbye with a simple gesture. Another example is, again, my 2-year-old daughter. She could come in and go, well, I'm changing the trash can, and simply enough, I know that she means P.U., Mommy, that smells awful. Sign language is also a great way to show how language can substitute verbal cues without actually giving any kind of verbal conversation. So I've shown you nonverbal cues like substitution. So now let's look at contradiction. Queen Juliana said, it must be a wonderful sport to contradict each other. So basically contradiction is just a way in which non-verbally we're contradicting what the verbal cue is. An example of this might be Julie and Frank just ran the big race and Julie says, Frank, how do you think you did? And he quite simply states, I think I did great. He's saying he did great, however, his verbal cues with his head down and sullen and his frown on his face, shoulders sunken, contradicts what he said, that he was doing great. A study by the Holmes Report, published in 2001, stated that $37 billion is lost through employee misunderstanding, through them contradicting what they've heard and what they're saying. And that's a staggering number. So we know contradiction serves as an opposing indicator in the process of communication. It allows the speaker to know if his or her message is really being understood. We've talked about the 5 ways verbal and nonverbal communication coincide with one another, so now let's summarize what that looks like. We can clearly see how the use of repetition, inflection, complementing cues, substitution, and contradiction all serve in bridging the gap between verbal and nonverbal communication styles. We send so many signals every day, not only in what we say, but how we say it and the body language we use and reflect when giving and receiving the information. I hope you enjoyed my speech today. I kind of feel like my speech was like a mini skirt, long enough to hold the essentials, but short enough to keep you interested. Thanks so much. This is Katrina Van Oosten. Have a great day.